All right, let's get into it. We're heading right into the heart of Amsterdam today to explore the Jordaan. It's a neighborhood that's basically a living, breathing postcard. But as you're about to see, there is so much more to it than just a pretty picture. You ask anyone who's been to Amsterdam, and they'll probably tell you the Jordaan is the absolute soul of the city. It's got this incredible, undeniable charm that just pulls everybody in, tourists and locals alike. But what is it that makes it so special? Well, here's the thing. It's a place with two faces, really, a story of two completely different worlds. So on the one hand, you've got that idyllic scenery everyone comes for, the quaint canals, the charming houses, the whole nine yards. But if you scratch just beneath the surface, you find this gritty, unbelievably resilient history. This isn't just a pretty face. This neighborhood was forged in hardship and rebellion. So how in the world did the Jordaan go from being a tough, working-class slum to the upscale, trendy spot it is today? Well, the story starts way back, over 400 years ago. And trust me, it's a roller coaster. You gotta understand, this place was never built for the rich. It was planned as the new work, a district for the laborers, the craftspeople, and all the immigrants who were powering Amsterdam's golden age. And its layout, it's totally unique because the streets and canals just followed the old paths and ditches of the countryside, which is why it has that famous, almost chaotic-looking grid. Okay, now let's fast forward a few hundred years. By the 1940s, this was a really tough place to live. It was overcrowded, it was poor. In fact, this is the very neighborhood where Anne Frank and her family hid during World War II. She actually wrote in her diary about hearing the sounds of the Jordaan from the secret annex, a constant, painful reminder of a world she couldn't be a part of. But it was also a place with this incredible spirit of resistance against the occupation. And this timeline, man, it just lays it all out perfectly. After the war, things really started to shift. By the 1960s, its rundown buildings and super cheap rent started attracting artists, students, and a whole wave of counterculture, the so-called hippies. They were the first ones to really see the beauty in the decay. And then by the 1980s, the rest of the world caught on, and the whole process of gentrification kicked into high gear, transforming the Jordaan into the polished gem we see today. But that transformation was anything but smooth. Now, this slide here is fascinating because it captures a huge turning point. In the 70s, the city had these big plans to demolish massive parts of the Jordaan for modernization. But the residents, they fought back hard. This protest poster literally asks, the Jordaan in ruins? And those red bits? Those are all buildings that were slated to be torn down. And here's the crazy irony. Their fight to save the neighborhood's soul is exactly what preserved its historic character, which in turn paved the way for the very gentrification that would change it forever. And all this history, it's not just tucked away in books. It's literally carved into the buildings themselves, hiding in plain sight if you know where to look. One of the Jordaan's absolute best-kept secrets are the Hofjes. Now, these are these beautiful, tranquil, hidden courtyards tucked away behind totally unassuming doors on the street. They were actually a form of charity, built by the rich back in the day to give free housing to poor elderly women. Seriously, stepping into one is like finding a secret garden that takes you back in time. And get this, these aren't just museum pieces. The Jordaan has more than 20 of them, and people still live there. While a lot of them are private, places like the Hofje or Het Hofje will welcome quiet visitors. They're these living, breathing communities that offer this rare moment of total peace right in the middle of a bustling city. Another one of these secret languages is found right on the front of the buildings. See, before we had house numbers, buildings were identified by these things called gablestones or gablestones. The best way to think of them is like old-school stone business cards. They told you who lived inside, a butcher, a tailor, a sailor, using symbols since a lot of people back then couldn't read. And what's so cool is that these stones tell you about the values of the people who lived here. A pelican, for example, symbolized charity and self-sacrifice. A sower represented hard work and, providing for your family. And a beaver, always busy building, that stood for persistence. It's like a visual history of the neighborhood's character right there on the wall. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the past, but what does it actually feel like to be in the Jordaan today? Let's dive into the sights, sounds, and tastes that make this place tick.
If it's Saturday morning in the Jordaan, it is all about the markets. This is when the neighborhood just comes alive. You've got the massive Lindengroth market, it's almost a kilometer long. And then right next to it is the Northern Mark, which is this incredible square that splits in two. One side is an organic farmer's market, and the other is a fantastic flea market. It is the social heart of the week, for sure.
And after a morning at the market, there is one stop that is absolutely non-negotiable for what many, many people say is the #1 can't-miss treat in all of Amsterdam. And that treat is, of course, the legendary Dutch apple pie from Winkel 43. But if you get there and the line is just ridiculously long, you can do what the seasoned locals do. Right across the square is Café Hekkerad. It's a classic brown cafe, and they serve an apple pie that's just as amazing, but with a much more authentic neighborhood vibe. And that brings us to the Bruin Cafe, or Brown Cafe. These places are basically the living rooms of the Jordaan, with their dark wood paneling, low lighting, and literally centuries of stories soaked into the walls. They are the definition of that famous Dutch word, gezelligheid, which kind of means coziness. Places like Café Pappeneiland or Café Chris, they're institutions. The Jordaan even has its own official soundtrack. It's called the Jordaan Lied, and it's this whole genre of sentimental, nostalgic folk music, all about the highs and lows of life in the old working-class neighborhood. The most famous singer was a guy named Johnny Jordaan, and his statue is a beloved local landmark. And finally, there's the sound that marks time every single day, the chiming bells of the Westertoren. This is the same clock tower that Anne Frank wrote about in her diary. She said the bells were a source of comfort for her, a faithful, regular sound from the outside world. They still ring out, every hour, connecting the Jordaan of today to its most poignant past. So if you ever find yourself in Amsterdam, how do you actually experience this authentic side of the Jordaan? How do you get beyond the usual tourist trail? Honestly, it's pretty simple. First, just get lost. Ditch the map. The real magic is in the narrow side streets and quiet canals, far away from the crowds. Go to the markets, try to find a hidden Hofje. And just for a moment, stop what you're doing and listen for those bells. That's how you'll find the neighborhood's true heart. Which brings us to a really interesting final question. The story of the Jordaan is a story of incredible transformation, from a working-class slum to a bohemian paradise, to one of the most desirable and expensive neighborhoods in the entire world. It really makes you wonder, when a place becomes so beloved by outsiders, what happens to the very authenticity that made it so special in the first place? It's something to think about.